Welcome to the DeFinity Market Strategy. I'm Paul Rodriguez of ThinkTrading.com, and I'm joined with Manu Choudhary, who's the CEO of DMA and the co-founder of DeFinity. Hi Manu, how are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. Another week in crypto, obviously a lot to talk about. But the first thing I want to do is answer a question. We had one of the YouTube subscribers asked a question regarding the SEC and what my view was in terms of regulation for coins backed by gold, for instance. And the reality is that this is outside the scope of the SEC's remit, although that doesn't normally stop Gary from commenting on it or trying to pass legislation. So this is 100% in the remit of the CFTC, given gold is a commodity. The problem, of course, is that the outgoing chairman of the CFTC, who's quite pro-crypto, is going to be gone in the next month or two. And it's very likely that the person that replaces him is going to be probably of the same ilk that Gary is and be somewhat anti-crypto. So what does that mean? I think, unfortunately, there will be quite large regulatory noises made. I believe that they will be pushing the lawmakers to pass legislation to regulate that. And just speaking about regulation again, just going over some of the nonsense that's going on in the United States, essentially, it looks very likely that you will see legislation passed probably in the next month or two that will require stablecoin issuers, essentially like Paxos and Circle Corporation, to register as banks. Now, that's going to be interesting because obviously that will be hard to enforce for people like USDT. And that's maybe why we're seeing so much FUD right now about USDT and the fact that 95% of it is not backed by anything that's of any substantial value, i.e. loans to other companies, what have you. But we already knew this anyway, it's nothing new. So that's, I think, certainly an interesting thing to talk about. On the slightly more positive, so last week we saw El Salvador mint its first Bitcoin using volcano renewable hydro mining, which is amazing. So this is, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe El Salvador has 28 active volcanoes. This volcano they're using initially will generate roughly, based on the current price of 55 and change, about $500 million a year of Bitcoin.
My goodness. And what were they using it for before? Surely power, right? Or is this has been
honestly,
built,
I don't know. I think this is a brand new endeavor. So maybe they were using it for power. Now they're basically using it to mine Bitcoin. But actually, it's funny. A friend of mine said to me, "Why don't they just give everyone free energy?" And it's like, well, yeah, that's fine. But actually, if you look at the return on your capital employed, for every dollar you deploy using this methodology, you're going to generate $100 worth of Bitcoin.
Yeah, makes sense.
So why would you not mine, harvest the Bitcoin, and then subsidize things?
Yes, exactly. It was a thought I had a while back when the oil price was really low. And I was thinking, well, you can always turn oil into money via Bitcoin, whatever may be happening to the resource, you can, that's it. Energy will turn into money because of this process. So it will never stay that low. And look at where it's going now. It's still powering ahead. But yeah, it's an interesting point.
Absolutely. So yeah, that's quite positive. Also, we discussed the China FUD and the assault that the Communist Party of China have taken again on people that are trading crypto. A lot of the large exchanges, centralized exchanges, have basically come forward and they've stopped the arbitrage of Chinese nationals using offshore entities to basically trade. So what happens? Well, crypto keeps on moving forward and people just turn to decentralized exchanges. So what's quite funny is DYDX, which is the crypto derivatives exchange that's decentralized, I think for 2 or 3 days last week did more volume than Coinbase.
Wow. Okay.
And if you look at some of the queries on Reddit, a lot of them have been really how to install, implement, use MetaMask and what have you. So they're all pushing to Web3 wallets. They're all pushing to use the decentralized exchanges. So it's a little bit like the Cuban government allowing people to transact in Bitcoin, even though people have been doing it since 2017. I mean, you can pass laws, you can do whatever you want. But the reality is that when you have a peer-to-peer asset, it's very difficult to stop people using it.
Yeah.
Which is brilliant. So that's made my day.
Amazing. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. I was just going to say the best way to promote a product is to ban it, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
So yeah, and Jerome Powell, he said something. Saw a headline of him saying something like he's not necessarily pro, but he has no intention of regulating it, I think is what he said. I can't remember. Perhaps you could tell me.
which is good because he's got no remit to regulate anything.
Yeah,
And to be fair, I guess
yeah, good
anything to
point.
distract from the weird coincidence of him and his buddies at the Federal Reserve front running the Federal Reserve, right?
Right. I see. Yeah.
I think that might be the real issue. It's all a coincidence. Don't worry. Don't look over here. Let me
Yeah,
talk about Bitcoin.
exactly. Great stuff. Well, there's been some very big movements in the market, so let's have a look there. So I'm just going to share my screen. So I was assuming that was everything. What have we got going on in the market? So let's start off with. I want to start off with the yields on US bonds, because before we go to crypto, I want to explain why there was this big sea change in the view, and why we had these levels that turned us from bearish, not bearish, but short-term bearish. We've always been long-term bullish on crypto. It's a question of whether we were in a topping pattern or whether the market's just going to go straight up. Well, this is the 10-year government bond. I didn't have space for it in the weekly, but this is the 10-year government bond. This line I drew in ages ago, and it was consolidating. We're expecting yields to go up. And as we've said a few times, if yields go up, it pulls money out of other markets. So we would expect normally at least there be for it to dampen interest in things like crypto and potentially the equity markets. All of that worked fine apart from the crypto markets. So the equity markets have corrected. They're having a rebound. We're expecting them to have this bounce up and down until they top out, because they're creating bigger tops. And that is normally a feature of markets when they're reversing, that they become volatile like this. So I'd expect some continued swings. But in the background, we have got inflation going up with the Baltic Dry Index, which is really important. Again, I put that in the weekly. That's still pushing higher with oil and everything else. But yields are moving up. And I think I surprised you last week when I said that we could go to 3% here. And we absolutely could. And you can see how things are now moving. Now things are moving. It's because the market is so used to nothing going on that they're not really expecting this to move, anything by more than a fraction of a percent. But this is now starting to move into a new trend. Now, it's a nascent trend. It's not fully developed, and it's still got some very big levels to take out. But this 1.774 level is extremely keen. And actually, where it is now at 1.596, there's a very good resistance point. But it's taken the downward trend line out, and it's going to take this resistance line out, I think. And I pretty much, I would expect it to go quite hard towards this 1.77 level. Now, the real head scratcher here was like last week, towards the end of the week, literally while we were doing this weekly call, everything in terms of risk off was increasing. So it looked like the markets were going to fall further. Asia's been falling, US markets are falling, tech's falling. And so we got all this risk off stuff going on, the VIX going up, and Bitcoin was just in its range, in its short-term range, but it then started to press up on a resistance line. Now, this was the resistance line that we talked about, and this is why it was an important short-term trigger. So I was willing to say, look, if it goes through this next week, it'll probably be a bit higher. So I buy it on a short-term basis, but for the long term, I still want to wait a little bit more, because we got this 48,273 and then this 5400 level that I've been talking about for a long time, where if it crosses, then it's gone too far for this to be a bearish pattern, and this could well turn into a massive bullish pattern. So this all happened very quickly, and so the headline is that this is now a much higher percentage chance of going to 100,000 this year as opposed to next year, because it has negated or certainly reduced the probability by a massive amount that this is a major top. So prior to that, we could have looked at this as a major topping pattern, and it would look like, let me just zoom out a little bit. So this could have potentially have been a double top. And to be fair, it still can. It's just that the chances of it doing that now, given that the altcoins are pushing higher in really strong trends, and the rate and the way it's doing it against the tide of higher yields and a potentially higher dollar, that is where things have changed. So there's literally, in my mind, been if it's willing to go up in all this environment, then I think there's some seriously strong buying behind it that should well take it into new highs. Now, that doesn't mean it's just going to go straight up and through these levels without a correction or retracement. So I do think we'll get a chance to buy it on a pullback, and we could see quite a substantial pullback. Volatility, in other words, is going to go up from here, even though it's still massive. So that's why I have been cautious, but that's also why I'm willing to wait for a breakout, because the ramifications of this move are 100,000 plus and altcoins going, 5x, 10x and more. And I don't want to sound like like somebody who's just promoting crypto for the sake of it. It's really that these charts are looking so bullish, and the power of these moves suggests that we will see moves that are commensurate with prior moves. So that's why we can make these potential expectations. Now, nothing in the market is guaranteed. Any old hand, anyone who's been in the markets for a while will tell you that you can't say anything 100%. It could stop here, it could collapse. So we're working on the basis of probabilities. So if we have to unwind this bullish view and it turns out to be a false move, then so be it. There's nothing we can do about that. But we can only analyze the markets as it unfolds in front of us. There is still bearish scenarios occurring in Asia and in the US stock market. But it could be that the market is just going to, shrug them off. The crypto market is going to shrug it off. So if we look at Ethereum, so this now has broken a similar line, and it's moving towards its prior high at 40.30. So in this wave, it should take out 40.30 and then test this prior high, come back for a retracement, and then move off into a new upward trend. So this would be one wave, and this would be a new wave. So it should extend at least towards $6,000 and possibly even higher. Now, the Ethereum Bitcoin chart, this didn't go according to plan. So I was expecting this to take off, and these highs, the highs were flat and the lows were rising and pushing up to a new high. So normally when this happens, the market is gearing up for a big breakout. Well, the rate of that, as you can see, was broken. So this kind of negated that move. Now, it's not completely over, because it could actually start again from this point. We could kind of redraw that line and say that these are the lows. So it's not that it's impossible, but it's just that it has weakened that scenario considerably, and we just have to wait and see. So this is in a range, but I think this will be extremely interesting, because there is a push me, pull you kind of affair going on with Bitcoin into the altcoins and then back into the majors. And I think this is just generally positive for everything. If whether Bitcoin's leading or lagging, it's going up. Ethereum, whether it's leading or lagging, it is still moving up. And there are more bullish setups now developing than there are bearish. So, we're always saying that there seem to be greater opportunities in some of the altcoins while we were kind of waiting for the breakout in the majors. But the breakouts in the majors have kind of caught up with what's going in the altcoins. The altcoins have consolidated. Some have consolidated a little bit, but they should be ready to go. So they've either gone and now consolidating and waiting for their second wave, or they haven't quite gone yet and they should go this week. So Cardano was one that we looked at a few weeks ago. It hit its high, retraced, and now it's playing off its trend line really nicely. And that, again, I think this week should see that accelerate to the upside. Solana is one that we've looked at many times, and the upward trend rate, we did say that this had got a little bit ahead of itself and it needed to come back to a more natural, sustainable angle of trend, which it has done so. So there was a lot of, not hype around it, but there was a lot of people talking about it. And when that happens, you get profit taking in a correction, which we've seen, and we were expecting this last week to push up from this trend line. It's done very nicely, retraced to test it again, but it should still push in an upward trend. Polkadot, which was a request from somebody in the community. So thank you for asking for it. And if anybody else has anything they want to look at, just let us know and we'll put it up. this is in a consolidation. So as you can see, it doesn't really look like it is trending. But given the broader picture, or the broader bullish picture, if we take a step back, this could be a massive, what we call a triangular constriction, which would initiate a buy trigger if it can break this upward line, and then we really get off to the races if it gets through 38. But it looks like it's gearing up for a move just because of the way the short-term chart has pulled away from this line a little bit quicker than you'd expect. So in other words, it didn't come down and touch it. So there's a bit of early buying going on, but it's not major. It's very subtle. But I think there will be this second catch-up wave in the markets that haven't moved yet, and therefore I think it'll make all the other coins look very interesting. So finally, just because it's here, we got the Matic network, which again is in a very similar situation. If we were just looking at this chart on its own, it wouldn't look particularly interesting because it's in a range. But given that we can now talk about this consolidation as though it is part of a sideways move before the market moves up, this makes this setup extremely bullish. So what I'm saying here is, instead of looking at this as a topping pattern, which is what it potentially could have been in a similar way to Bitcoin, this actually could be viewed as a continuation pattern. And if we take a step back and look at it like a continuation pattern, then it's going to do this move from 0.013 all the way up to 0.283 again. It's going to repeat this move into next year. So that's targeting 12. So given these bullish scenarios, I think there's going to be plenty of volatility ahead. It does feel like at this moment in time, perhaps you've missed the move. It always feels like that. But actually, if it's going to be a good move, it's going to go beyond, in terms of Bitcoin, it's going to go beyond 100,000. So we should get the answers to some of these altcoins either this week. I would expect it to be this coming week, but if not, allow 2 weeks for them to follow on. Normally it wouldn't take that long. And then we'd expect a pullback in the majors, because there just will be some profit taking for the short-term players who bought it on the breakout. And then we'll see how the market settles down and whether they're approaching these highs, in which case there will be acceleration as we move into November and potentially December. So it's all looking really exciting and interesting, which is great. So, Manu, back to you.
So I guess the only thing I'd say is that I was a little bit surprised that you saw this decoupling so early. I was expecting this to happen next year. So essentially to basically behave in a way counter to the equity markets, the fixed income market. So that's anything that kind of threw me off a little bit. It does seem slightly strange that we're seeing these bullish moves in the digital asset space, whereas gold is getting hammered, silver is getting hammered.
Yeah.
The Nasdaq in particular is getting hammered, but equities in general, and people are dumping government bonds. So it's slightly odd, but I knew this was going to happen eventually. I'm just surprised by how quickly it's happened.
Me too. Me too. I got it wrong. I thought it would be next year. And that's the thing, because the market isn't doing what I'm expecting, I could just dig my heels in and say, well, it's the market's wrong. But I put that 5,400 level for a reason. It was like, well, look, if it gets over there, I can't keep expecting it to do something that it's not doing. And when it was so inverse, I had to just say, look, this is the risk is that we don't go with this move. We remain bearish and it takes off. And I think given the power of the move, I'd rather have a go at it going up and be wrong than just sit there and constantly wait for new signals that it would, more confirmation basically. But you're absolutely right. This is very, very strange, and this is why we wouldn't normally be wrong-footed by a move like this. But this is what happens when the market is in a range. Like in the coming months, we're going to see some smooth trends and some setups that have a much higher probability. And that's why when you're looking at the markets week to week, it's not that there's necessarily the buying or the trading opportunity at that point. There are only a few times when those signals are so clear that it's they move towards 90%, but a lot of the time it can be between 50 and 60% probability of something happening. So you have to kind of build that into your analysis. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It is very strange. but that's the way it is. So, I mean, I could be wrong. I mean, actually, you make a good point about that too, because it might be that this is a warning sign that this perhaps isn't the move that we're expecting, and it's all going to unravel. But I mean, I don't know what you think of the altcoins. They're certainly not acting in a bearish way, and my feeling about those was, okay, the technology, when you look into it, of a lot of these coins is so interesting, and we're such early stage that it could decouple from the majors because they represent completely different technologies, like different shares. But but even so, there is still risk associated, and that risk is either increased or decreased by what's going on with the other asset classes outside its realm. So rising interest rates, and interest rates that are rising fast, is not good for any asset class usually, unless they're using crypto as a safe haven, in which case that makes perfect sense. Unless there's something coming that we haven't thought about that would make the US bond markets and yields go up, but it would also make people go faster into crypto.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think next week will be a very interesting week, and certainly by the middle of the month, we will have a lot more clarity as to whether this is a bit of a fake out, or this is actually the beginning of a new impulsive move, which will be incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell from I don't think you're completely convinced at this point, or are you just
I'm disappointed, Paul. I was looking to buy a load of Bitcoin in 20K, and now I
Yeah,
can't.
yeah, I know. That is, yeah. I mean, that is really, when we hit the top, you'll see something similar, and I will say exactly the same thing. In other words, like that sort of price action is normally associated with a big top, and you're not always right. You can't.
Yeah,
Nobody's always right for sure. We're only working on the probability. It's just when things change, you've got to change your mind. So yeah, I was expecting that too, but we were always looking at some point for 100,000. I think either way,
yeah,
we're going to get there. So it really is a question of your whether you're looking to sort of average up on the way down, which is not always the best strategy, or
yeah.
whether if you're a long-term holder, whether you just stay in it. So, but look, as always, thank you, Manu, for your comments. And if you have any views on this, if you think if you want to put anything in the comments, if you want any markets looked at, just put it in the comments. We will add them. And thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you again next week.